sisters should do blah, blah, or husbands should pay more attention when their wives are talking as they're trying to do their job, like whatever it is, right? And sometimes what I learn is like, it's just like thoughts that I've taken and made my own. And I'm like, yeah, you should totally do this thing my way because my way is correct, right? And again, just like to notice for yourself when you do those things, it's like, it's not so you can blame yourself or beat yourself up or be unkind to yourself. But I just want you to like, just always be willing to question like the thoughts that come through your mind.
Hi, welcome to the Stethoscope with Swaddles podcast, episode number 78.
Hey mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. All right. Well, I hope you like our new co-host, Miss Bella, and welcome to this week's episode. So I had prepared a different episode, but I have decided to change gears just slightly to share some thoughts that have been on my mind that may apply to a lot of you right now. And I just kind of wanted to, take this segue and share some things that have been on my heart and have like a short and sweet conversation with you. So by the time this episode airs, it'll be probably time for the kids to go back to school, depending on where your school district and how kids went and how kids go back to school. And I was thinking about the idea of like summer's coming to an end. We have had all the fun, all the things, all the activities, all the summering. But I hear from women everywhere that they're kind of excited about summer coming to an end. And why I think this is an important topic to have is when we talk about enjoying having our kids and enjoying parenting, sometimes it's very interesting how society, especially now we're in the whole like hashtag gratitude, and I love me a good gratitude around here. But we kind of guilt ourselves when we're not super excited about like parenting or being with our kids or like enjoying every waking moment of their lives. And we may sometimes use gratitude against ourselves. You're like, oh, well, I don't know why I'm so excited the kids are going back to school, yet I love having them here. I love them. I love being a mom. But sometimes when we do that, we tend to use gratitude against ourselves. And I use this example specifically because some of you might have heard this meme that's been going around, and it's like when somebody complains about, their kids, and it's like, yeah, Karen, I don't hate my kids. I just like hate some days of motherhood. And I think it's important for us to have those conversations about like not every day of motherhood is super exciting, super, fantastical. So I want to paint a picture for you. So it's a Monday morning, kids are back to school, and you suddenly realize, oh my gosh, my kid has this play tonight. I didn't request the day off and I'm not going to get off on time. And you go to work and you have an insane day at work. And fortunately, your spouse can attend the event that you're going to miss. And so it works out just fine. Your husband goes or your partner goes and your kid appreciates that. You come home and the kids are screaming and dinner's not ready. You're frustrated. You're frustrated at, the things that have happened throughout the day. You're tired from work and you've had just like a crazy, insane day and you're just tired and you're just like, oh my gosh, like I just feel like I hate my job. And then your husband maybe says something to you and you're like, okay, one more thing that I got to do. And then as the day is winding down, you're like so tired, you literally can't wait for the kids to go to bed because you're just like you're done, right? You are ready to be done. The kids go to bed and you sit there and you're like, I should be grateful. I want to be more grateful. I don't understand why I am acting like this, right? And one of the things I've noticed, I think now that gratitude, and by all means, I'm so grateful, pun intended, that people are embracing gratitude and valuing the importance of gratitude in our lives. And that is not the topic of this podcast. What I'm concerned about is seeing how we tend to sometimes use gratitude against ourselves. So it could be that now you're like, oh, I should be grateful that I even have a job. I shouldn't be complaining that I missed my kid's event. I should be grateful that I have a kid. I shouldn't be upset with them when I'm just like having a rough day and I can't pour from an empty cup anymore. I should be grateful that I have a spouse who helps me, that I shouldn't notice that, he forgot to do this one thing and therefore, I should just like gratitude shame myself, basically. And I just think that this conversation is worth having because that is not the function of gratitude. Like, gratitude does help us reframe and find where we are in the present moment. But when we use gratitude against ourselves, we refuse to acknowledge what is actually happening. So I recently had a conversation with one of my coaching clients, and she is in business and she had this great business event. And she was concerned about the number of people that showed up. And so when we were talking, she says to me, I want you to help me reframe my mindset so I can be more grateful. And I was like, yeah, tell me more. So we started to explore what she was actually grateful for. And it was a lot. She was grateful that the event was great. She was grateful about the turnout. And I said, okay, now what are you disappointed about? And she was like, well, I had a target. I wanted a specific number of people to show up to this event. And, this other number showed up. And so I asked her, I said, aren't you grateful still for the people that did show up while you can be disappointed that you didn't miss your goal? And it was almost like this moment where she was like, oh yeah, I could do both. I could be grateful, so, so grateful for the opportunities and for the people that came, but I can also feel disappointment in the fact that I had set up a goal and I didn't meet the goal, and it doesn't mean anything about me, but I can feel that emotion. I can allow myself to quote unquote grieve what didn't happen, right? So sometimes I think when we talk about like parenting and we're so grateful for our children, we should pay attention to when we then invalidate any of our experiences in the name of gratitude. So is it saying, oh, for example, I should be so grateful that I have a kid that I should always like be so excited even when they're screaming at the top of their voice. I should be so grateful I have a job even though it means missing my kid's event. I should be so grateful. Like, notice when you say to yourself, I should be so grateful, but just check in. Like, can you be grateful that you had a great summer with your kid and also appreciate the fact that it was exhausting and you're ready for them to go back to school? Like, is it okay? Can we have both? Right? Can we be grateful to have jobs, but also notice the burnout that is in healthcare right now? Can we be grateful for the patients that we take care of while still noticing the unfair things that happen at work, while still noticing the fact that employers are not valuing their employees as they should, right? Can we speak up against the injustices that are happening at the workplace while still taking care of our patients, right? So can we have both? And I believe that, yes, we can. Like, we can be grateful, but also we can visually notice what is actually happening in the moment. And I think when we can be more clear about that, I think we can maybe allow ourselves to feel the emotions that are happening in the present moment. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, are you using gratitude against yourself? And how can you go back to tuning in with what you need, and how can you be supported, and how can you support yourself in that moment? So that is the first thing. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is something that happened to me. I was doing some inner child work, and I had this moment where an event came up from my life, and I want to share it with you, not for the purpose of rehashing it, because, I mean, it's been gosh, it was in 1995. It was 27 years ago. But I want to set the framework for you so that I can explain it a little more. So I was 12 years old. I was just trying to find my way in the world. And I had just moved to a new school that April. My dad had left the country to go work elsewhere. My mom was like trying to navigate, basically single-handedly parenting 3 kids. And the best solution was to transfer schools to be at the same school that my sister went to so that the school transportation would be not that big of an issue. So here we are. I'm in the 7th grade. I have like had the same friends since the 3rd grade. And now like I'm moving to a new school. I have another year and a half, and then I was going to go to high school. So I went to the school, and I just didn't understand why the girls in my class didn't like me. And I would like just argue with myself, like, am I rude? Am I arrogant? Do I come across as snotty? Like, why do they not want to be my friends? I couldn't figure it out. So anyway, one of the girls, we became very good friends until one Thursday afternoon. Yeah, I know the day it happened. She wrote me a note and she put it in my backpack and she said, don't open it until you get on the school bus. So I get on the school bus and I sit down and I start to read this note. And in this note, she said she didn't want to be my friend anymore. And I cried and I cried and I cried and I cried. I cried all the way home. I cried when I got off the bus. And my sister, who was 6-year-old at the time, laughed at me. She just thought it was so comical I was crying over a friend. I got home and I was like, I am never going to speak to these people again, and I'm never going back to school. Well, except the fact that I couldn't even tell my mom. She was dealing with her own stuff. And so I didn't. And so I went to school every day after that, and I hated every moment of school. And at some point in the journey of school, we all like just got along. I mean, we weren't like, bosom buddies, but we were all like getting along. And, eventually I graduated from that school. I went to high school. I went to boarding school. Story for another day. But what I was thinking about when I was doing my embodiment work is that this memory has been in the background of my brain for 27 years. And when I was doing this embodiment work, I had this like almost like light bulb moment. And it was a phrase by Deidre Fay in Becoming Self-Embodied. And I contextualized this issue and I was like, oh my God, that is the thing. And what I came up with was that when I think of this event and I get really flooded, like I actually would like think about it and get really upset. And I'm like, I'm going to go to Facebook and delete all those people from being my friends because they were not nice to me when I was 12 years old and, whatever, all the theatrics. The thought that came up to me was that the reason I have this flooding sensation about that incident, that flooding represents the lack of context and understanding that the 12-year-old me was unable to provide for the event. And I'm going to talk a little bit about context in terms of like the nervous system. And so when we think about the nervous system, context and connection are very important, right? So if you think about context, like if you maybe see somebody and you don't see them physically, like they send you a text message and they say, I can't hang out with you tonight. And you can't see their face, so you don't have the context. You can be like, oh my God, are they mad at me? Are they upset? La, la, la. But if you see them and you look at their face and they're smiling and they're like, I'm so sorry, I can't go out tonight. Like my kid has this thing happening. I can't make. Different context, right? Same sentence, but like totally different experience. So when I think about 12-year-old me, could not contextualize and provide myself like an understanding at that time, right? And what that was so eye-opening for me was that I then had this thought that is the part of me that holds the terror of being rejected by other people. So when I experience the emotion in that moment, when I have a thought that I'm being rejected, whether it's by an employer, a friend, a potential coaching client, right? I can sometimes have an emotion that doesn't match the present, like a reaction. So I've used this example on the podcast. I'm going to continue to use it, but it could be like the experience of my husband saying there's dishes in the sink and me assuming that I'm being criticized and blowing out of proportion, right? And so when you notice sometimes like, are you projecting or are you like actually reacting to what's happening? When you can just kind of maybe like back dial a little bit, right? And realize, yeah, that part of me has stayed with me all along. And it was almost like the universe knew that I needed to have those moments because I had just started listening to Viola Davis's memoir, Finding Me, which I'm going to link in the show notes. And in chapter 1, she describes this like traumatic event that she had when she was 9. And when I was reading that, listening to her, I felt all the emotions rise in me. And she talked about a practice that her therapist had her do, which is something that similar that I've done with my own therapist. And that was to sit with that little girl and give her a hug. And so I have made very clear intentions to go back to the past sometimes and give little 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 11-year-old, 13-year-old me a hug and just tell her, yeah, like you didn't have the context and understanding that you do now. So, of course, it was so painful, right? And love myself just the way I am and love myself because I'm deserving of it. So I want to share that with you because sometimes when we do embodiment work and we tune into the stories in our brain, we don't often question like, oh, like where did that thought come from? Why am I thinking this thought? Like, where did that belief even come from? Like, what's the root of that belief? And sometimes it can go way back in the past and we haven't made that connection. And so I think it's important when you find yourself like resisting certain emotions to just like ask yourself, like, where did I learn that? I'll give you an example. I was on a coaching call with a client and she said to me, she said, I don't like to feel angry. And she told me this story about her grandmother who was super, super angry all the time, who was around in her life a lot. And for her, like when she envisions herself angry, she puts her grandmother in the picture and she does not want to be that person. And so I helped her realize like, one, like you're not her, and two, your experience of anger is not the same as her experience of anger. And can you separate yourself from that individual and learn how to notice your own emotion and your own emotional responses? So I think sometimes like we bring things from our past that we might not really, really pay attention to, but they're so worth like just thinking about because, again, they're always there. Right? They're always there, and sometimes they may pop up at the wrong time. Okay, so the other one I wanted to share about was the context of that you're not for everybody, and that's okay. So one of the stories that I've shared and I've shared in social media is when I was 8 years old, and I was probably 8 or 9. My cousin Andrew and my grandmother went to visit some family members who live in this place where they grow a lot of plums. I mean, they're everywhere, every corner. But my cousin and I had never seen such a thing. So we were so excited. We ate so many plums. I mean, we were sick to our stomachs. And then later that day, we were like, you know what? We should sell plums on the side of the road. And so we get on the tree and we get these plums and we go to the side of the road and people just keep walking by us and just smiling. And funny thing is how I actually had this memory was when I was at the Kenyan coast in July of this year. My daughter and my nephew were like playing with baby coconuts. And my nephew was like, we're going to sell you coconuts and we even take Apple Pay. And do you want them? And we're looking at them like, why would we want like your rotten little coconuts when we can actually just eat coconuts like here? We're at the coast, right? And I thought about this in the context of like sometimes we try to offer ourselves to people who don't need us. Right? We try to get their attention, we try to get their affection in a bid for us to kindle our ego. And we may find ourselves tolerating friendships and romances and relationships that are not serving us so bad because we want to offer ourselves to these people. And when things don't go the way we want them, right, we can become defensive or like just feel like, well, they don't need us and they're not nice and they don't deserve us. But they haven't done anything wrong. They just have had thoughts about us. And we keep wanting to change their thoughts about like us, right? So we try to sell them these coconuts at the beach or these plums in a place full of plums. They already have their own coconut and plum trees. They don't need the things we're offering them. And it's not that there's anything wrong with our coconuts, right? Our coconuts just don't mean anything to them. And so next time you find yourself like beating yourself up about being in a place or a relationship that's not serving you, I want to offer you to remind yourself that you can just find the people and the places who value and where you're valued, right? You can direct your energy towards relationships that give you an opportunity to grow and the opportunity to show up as your authentic self because you are 100% worth it. And you deserve to be in a place where you can feel loved and connected and impacted and all the things. The next lesson is something that I just thought about recently, and it was related to like when we sometimes have like thoughts that we've kind of sat with and we make them like beliefs. Again, like beliefs are just thoughts that we choose to have over and over and over again, right? And so you have these thoughts, you don't question them, and so are very attached to them. So you're like, I, for example, think people who are family should be a certain way. If you love somebody, you will do XYZ. And so you're like, this person does not love me because they didn't do things the way I think they should be done, right? Or this person doesn't care about me because they didn't do whatever. And what can happen is that you find yourself in this situation where you're always coming up against protest about things that, like, maybe they make sense to you, but maybe they don't make sense to the people, right? Like, maybe you might feel like, oh, but they should be listening more, or like my mother-in-law should be kinder, or my mother-in-law should be friendlier, or she should want to spend more time with her grandkids, or she should want to, come do blah, blah. And it's just literally like you just have these thoughts, you've developed them. And one thing that I learned from my coach is like, sometimes I'll ask myself, where did I learn that? Where did I learn that grandmothers should spend time with their kids? Or where did I learn that, sisters should do blah, blah, or husbands should pay more attention when their wives are talking as they're trying to do their job, like whatever it is, right? And sometimes what I learn is like, it's just like thoughts that I've taken and made my own. And I'm like, yeah, you should totally do this thing my way because my way is correct, right? And again, just like to notice for yourself when you do those things, it's like, it's not so you can blame yourself or beat yourself up or be unkind to yourself. But I just want you to like, just always be willing to question like the thoughts that come through your mind. So another thing is sometimes we, like when I talk about thought work and I talk about like noticing our thoughts, people who are new to coaching are like, so I'm going to have to stop and like watch every thought. And I was thinking about this recently, and I wanted to share this with you if you are one of those people that like maybe resist the idea of like noticing your thoughts. So when you're walking through life and you don't pause to pay attention to your thought, right? The thoughts just like keep coming, right? So, and I recently heard the statistics and I thought it was so crazy. So again, we have like over 80,000 thoughts that run through our heads every day. And can you imagine that 90% of today's thoughts were the ones that you primarily give attention to yesterday? So if you're never stopping to just be like, what is even going on in my head, right? It could be that you're kind of living this like continuous dream of the same thought pattern, like over and over and over and over and over again. But when you do stop and pause to listen, you might be like, oh, that's an interesting thought. Like, where did I learn that? And do I want to believe it? And so this is just maybe an approach that might work for you. It's worked for me and it's helped me just kind of pay attention. So imagine you're driving down like a steep like hill, okay? You're driving down, your car is like going. You realize that you're overspeeding, but you don't necessarily step on the brake or push the gas pedal. You kind of just like stay neutral and let the car like go down the hill until like maybe you slow down or you speed up. Sometimes when you have a thought, I want to offer you to just like imagine, don't push on the gas, don't further the thought, or don't stop completely. Just like the car is still moving as you're noticing the thought. So I'll give you an example from a conversation I had with one of my clients. So we were talking about her significant other, and he was on the phone and she was like doing something, and she's averse to people being on the phone. And she had this thought that he shouldn't be on the phone and he's not paying attention and he doesn't care because he knows that I value people not being on the phone. And so what I was helping her see is like in that moment when you started to believe that he doesn't care, right? Like how do you then show up in the relationship? And she was like, yeah, I started to feel like a little upset and like a little resentful and judgment and like that. And so we're going down the hill. And I'm like, in that moment, right? you probably didn't have time to be like, okay, let me self-coach on this. What is the thought? What is the circumstance? What's the feeling? What's the action? Da da da, right? But if you had stopped for a second to be like, is it even true he doesn't care about me? You could have been like, no, it's not true. And you could just like then decide, I'm having the thought that he doesn't care about me, and leave that thought for you to like address, right? Versus like, he doesn't care about me. So then you go down the hill, you push the gas, and you just like go downhill real quick. Like there is no salvation there. So I just want to offer you that thought. If you are the person who finds yourself not wanting to like really explore your thoughts in that moment, can you pause for a second and just be like, oh, I'm having this thought. Do I want to follow this thought? What feeling does this thought create? The other thing that I wanted to share with you is when sometimes you have like patterns that you've noticed for yourself. Like, let's say you like to procrastinate and you use the example that the reason you put things off so much is because you want them to be perfect. And I myself have had a history of saying that. Like, I'm like, yeah, I put it off because I wanted to do it just right. Well, the problem is when it was like put off for so long, when it was time to do it, it was not just right. Or maybe you are trying out a new diet protocol and you're like, I'm not going to eat flour and sugar. I'm currently trying that. So that's the example I'm going to use. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to eat flour and sugar. And so I go through the motions and I'm not eating flour and sugar. And then I like maybe after a few weeks, I'm like, this is not working. This is not working. But I never stopped to be like, okay, did you follow it like 100% of the time? Right? Because what usually happens for me is like if I have a moment where I, for example, slide into a bowl of ice cream, which is not really what I do. But let's say I just eat ice cream. Then I'm like, oh, well, I've already messed up today. I might as well just keep going. And then tomorrow I'm going to do it perfectly because now it's messed up. Well, then tomorrow comes. And then I'm like, oh, now I'm really jonesing for some cookies. And I eat cookies. And I never stop to evaluate like the idea that I'm telling myself like, oh, I want it to be just perfect. So I have to have a fresh start. When you never evaluate the things that you're doing and the actions and the thoughts and the feelings, you can keep changing the game, but you're never really getting any results. And so when my client offered me the thought, like she was like, oh, I want to be perfect. So like if I miss a workout, I will like start afresh. And I'm like, okay, so you start afresh. And then what happens? And then she's like, well, then I do a long workout. And then what happens? And then I'm tired. And then I burn out. And I'm like, yeah, so like then you never actually do it perfectly, even though you've told yourself that that's like what I'm wanting to do. So I was like, okay, can you be willing to take messy action? And her thought was like, no, but I want it to be perfect. I'm like, but when you do evaluate how the results of you, quote unquote, wanting to be perfect, how have those results served you? And she was like, oh, yeah, they haven't. Like, I haven't achieved anything, right? So notice for yourself, for example, like when you say, I want to try a new habit, or I want to try a new diet, or I want to like make something perfect. I always use the example of the podcast. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I have like to outline the podcast. It has to be perfect. And then it's like literally the day like the podcast is due to my podcast producer, Cassidy. And I'm like, I have nothing, right? Because I've been quote unquote wanting it to be perfect. And what I notice for myself is when I put that pressure of things being perfect for me, I actually don't create a good product. And so I have made like a mindset shift to be okay with like B plus work instead of A positive work that's done at the last possible minute. And, if you just pay attention and you evaluate, it can help you really a lot. Like even like disciplining your kids and the methods that you're using, if you never stop to evaluate them, you can be going down this path of like something you don't want to be doing because you've never stopped to actually check. So how do you evaluate? So the method that I use, a method that I learned from my coach, my business mentors, it's very simple, and that in just is you look at what's been happening and you go through 3 different areas. The first area is what has worked well, or what worked well. Like since I'm evaluating something in the past, like what worked well. So let's say it was my protocol and I say, okay, I paid attention to my hunger cues. I ate when I was hungry. I avoided flour and sugar for breakfast. Okay. Then you go to what didn't work. And the reason you always start with what worked well is because you give your brain something to celebrate, and then it has a positive bias, and then you're not like beating yourself up and like everything sucks and I didn't do anything right. So then you go to what didn't work, right? So what didn't work could be I skipped a meal and therefore I was hungry and then I didn't have enough food on protocol, or I didn't pack a lunch and so I didn't plan ahead of time. I, for example, did not decide on the podcast topic ahead of time, for example, right? So what didn't work? And then the last part is, now that I know what didn't work, what am I going to do differently? And so it could be like plan out my meals for the week, or outline a month of podcast episode, do the research that I need to do, have it ready, like put it on the calendar. It's going to be done on this date. It's going to be recorded at this time. And it doesn't matter how much work I've done production wise, it's going to be produced anyways, right? Because the worst podcast is the one that's not produced, right? Right? So if I'm like, but it has to be perfect, and then I don't produce something, which has happened on a few occasions, then it's like, you, my listener, didn't get a podcast episode that week because, quote unquote, I wanted it to be perfect, right? So then am I serving my people? Am I actually putting value out in the world by doing that? So notice that if you do evaluate, you then come up with solutions and then you can tweak things here and there. So if you have caught yourself in the habit of changing the game, trying to do things differently and not really like you're just all over the place, just pay attention to how you are evaluating it, and then decide, like, before I go to the next thing, can I evaluate this thing to see exactly what about it worked and what can I bring it with me to the future, what didn't work, and then what would I do differently? I think it's a very important process, and the more I do it, the more I see results, the more I can evaluate over and over and over, like what's working. I love the idea of just like seeing in my life the areas that I can improve based on the work that I've already done. And so I started using this method consistently this year, where I would like evaluate my week. I will evaluate like, okay, what are my needle moving activities in my business? How are my coaching calls? How did I show up? What was the energy I was in? Did I self-coach this week? Do I want to self-coach every day? If I give myself the pressure, like, am I journaling? Like, do I want to do those things? I can then decide these are going to be my habits and bring them with me to the future. So I just wanted you to like have these like thoughts from my head this week, because I just was like, no, I don't want to produce the episode that I thought I was going to do. And I'll tell you why in the next episode, because I'm preparing a workshop and I want to give you all the details with that podcast episode. So I'll have it ready for you, I promise. But yeah, you'll hear about it next week, right? Okay. Before I go, I wanted to share some feedback from somebody that I got on the podcast. This listener was so sweet. She sent me a message on Facebook Messenger and she was like, "Thank you so much for pouring into us as professional moms. You have made such a difference for me and I can't thank you enough. It's the way you explain and explore the way to navigate life and relationship, which is everything. You say it in a way that I have actually heard it." And then she also goes on to share, which is so important, which is the reason I share this work here. She says, "I really was clueless about how many of us struggle. I consider myself a pretty strong woman too, and at times I just want to throw my hands up and scream. Not anymore. I just listen to you and how to be better and then apply it. Game changer." So this feedback meant so much to me because it reminds me of why I show up on this podcast, why I'm so passionate about coaching women, why I'm so passionate about like sharing like, you know, mindset shifts, sharing like how we want to show up differently in our marriages, our relationships, because really like we're changing the way we look at situations and our perspective changes and we can show up as the best version of ourselves no matter what the people around us are doing. Like we can change the world by changing ourselves. And I will always be a believer of the power of one, which is a concept I learned from my friend Maggie Reyes, that you yourself can change your relationship and the direction of your life by embracing the mindset shifts that are going to move your marriage and relationships forward and grow you as a person. The other feedback that I wanted to share was from one of my coaching clients. And this week, she shared with me something that I think is very important to bring up here. So in the communities that we're in different areas, there's a lot of like conversations that are maybe not pro-marriage. They're not anti-marriage, but they're not pro-marriage either. And they're not very supportive of like working on your relationship, showing up as the best version of yourself and all of that. And she was sharing with me her own experiences as a person who's going through a separation. And she said to me, it is so important that you keep showing up to share the work that you're sharing, because if I had had this resource when I didn't realize that the bids in my marriage were not, we weren't bidding well, we weren't connecting well, maybe I could have done something different back then. And so I share this work from a place of knowing that you are such a brilliant woman. Like, you are epic at the things that you do at your job. Like, you are a badass. And so, like, your marriage can also reflect that. Your life can also reflect that. And I am such a believer in that. Like, I believe that the way we show up, like, listen, we, like, show up and, like, intubate these difficult airways and, like, crazy cases, like it's nothing, right? This week I had a case where my patient lost 2.5 liters of blood like this, like in a flash. And I'm telling my friends who are not in the medical field, and they're like so fascinated. And for me, it's like, oh, all in a day's work. Like, I was prepared for it. Was I exhausted at the end of the day? Yeah. But like, the fact that we do these epic things and we're good at them, can we do those epic things in our lives? Absolutely yes. Right? And the last thing I'm going to say today is this. I know I come on here and I share things like, what are the predictors of divorce and what are the things that you should be looking out for in your marriage? And I don't do that from a place of like, oh my God, let me scare the people, right? I just want you to know, because again, you, like many of my listeners, are in the medical field and probably in anesthesia. Like, when we go to train in anesthesia, we learn all the bad things that can happen to a patient under general anesthesia, for example, or even a spinal or whatever. Like, we talk about like laryngospasm can happen. We talk about like malignant hyperthermia. We learn all the bad things, right? Like, we learn all of them and we learn how to prepare for them. We don't learn about them so we hope that they happen, right? We learn about them so that when they do happen, we are 100% prepared to handle them. So I want you to like take this as when you learn about like things to look out for in your relationships and like how to do better, take it as, yeah, I'm learning this so that when I have the quote unquote difficult area in my marriage, I know exactly how to handle it. Right? I'll be prepared for it. I'll have all the tools. I will have like my difficult area algorithm for my marriage. So think about it that way, and it changes the game, because then you're like, oh, I'm not like scaring myself about all the bad things that could happen. I am 100% prepared for them. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I also have a outro by our dear Bella, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye now. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.
Hi.
Hi, Bella.
Hi.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about why you wanted to come back to the podcast.
Because the podcast wasn't recording.
Oh, got it. Okay. And so, but this time you said you wanted to be interviewed for the podcast again.
Yeah.
Yeah? What would you like to tell the audience?
That they were really sweet.
Uh-huh. How has your summer been?
Good.
Okay. What are you grateful for?
For you.
Okay.
And my friends and our house and my toys and everything.
Got it. And why are you grateful for me?
Because you're nice and sweet.
Okay. And why are you grateful for your friends?
Because they're kind and sweet.
Got it. And why are you grateful for your house?
Because it's really big.
Okay. And what are you grateful? Why are you grateful for your toys?
Because I have a lot of them.
Got it. Okay. Now, tell me, what is one thing you love about yourself?
That I'm kind.
That you're kind. And I love that about you. You're very kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you came back. The last time we recorded a video and I shared it, the audience really liked it. So I wanted you to come back and introduce this week's podcast. And I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Bella.
I love you.
I love you too, Mama.
Mama, now can I hear it?
Yeah.